Hello, my name's Anthony and welcome to the 500K detail featuring a 1965 Shelby GT350. Okay, so am I making $500,000 on this detail? Unfortunately not, but that's how much this car is worth. So I'm going to show you guys what goes into providing a swirl-free, scratch-free finish on a collector car such as this. I'm going to be using a variety of polishers, compounds, high-end microfibers from the rag company, as well as some of the best detail lighting I could find. The Shelby GT350 is an iconic classic car, and I want to make sure that the paint is perfected and protected for future generations to enjoy. So when doing a high-end detail such as this, there's a checklist of things I like to go over before I even touch the car. First things first, you want to ask the owner if there's any problem areas on the car or anything that you should be aware of. Now this could be burns through the clear coat, this could be paint chips, or this could be any areas on the paint that you should not be touching at all. Now for these areas, I usually like to make note of those with a little piece of blue tape to know to stay away from those at all time. Now, if the owner doesn't have any previous history with the car or know really of any of the imperfections, then that's when I also like to do an inspection for myself. And I'm going to show you exactly what I do right now. So I mentioned I like to use some really nice lighting when I'm doing paint correction. So my lighting of choice are Scan Grip color match lights. These lights right here are a perfect detailing tool to be able to find scratches and swirls. Scan Grip has a variety of different models. They have the big panel lights, they have the handhelds, and they have the pen lights. So to give you guys an idea on what to look for, we're going to be going over the GT350 here and looking for swirling. So I don't know if you guys can see this on the camera, but there is a large amount of swirling on the hood here, on the fender. I would say the car was probably improperly washed a handful of times using something that possibly causes swirls or scratches. Now, I would check for all the panels and make sure that there's no deep gouges or anything that I should be noting for a problem area. A lot of times you'd find paint chipping or maybe of a bad paint job showing some high marks or some areas that were not wet sanded properly when the finish was done. So overall, the paint quality of this car looks really good. I'm not seeing any orange peel. I'm not seeing any high leveling areas where the stripes are. Overall, I would say that the quality of the paint is good. It's just extremely swirled. So this is one of the first steps you want to do involving a paint correction. Okay, so now that you guys know how to look for scratches and swirls, the next part on the checklist is using a paint depth gauge. Now, it's kind of all in the name. It's going to tell you how much paint is left on the car. The more advanced depth gauges are going to show you how much primer is left, how much base coat is left, and how much clear coat is left. Cheaper paint depth gauges are going to show you just how much paint is left in general, and it's going to give you a mil amount showing you how much clear coat you can work through when using a polisher. Now for this car, I know that it was recently repainted, and so I know that there's plenty of clear according to the owner. So now that you guys know my checklist, let's move on to the next part of the detail. Okay, so with the inspection done, it's time to wash the car. Since this is a classic car, it's got a lot of big panel gaps on there, so we don't want to get any water in areas that it shouldn't be. So we're going to be using O&R standard dilution. I'm going to be doing a pre-spray, and we're going to be using our Eagle edgeless towels as our wash media. We're going to be doing straight passes. So in doing a classic car or a high-end car such as this, a rinseless wash should always be your go-to. When doing a big foam wash with lots of water and pressure washers and things like that, water is going to go everywhere. So minimizing how much water is used is going to be to our best benefit, especially since we are going to be doing a polish anyway. So any light marring or anything like that is going to be removed in the polishing process. Okay guys, now that the car is washed and dried, now it's time for one of the most important steps in this entire process, which is decontamination. So for this, we're going to be using the Optimum clay towel. Now, for an example for you guys, when you go and feel your paint, it should feel as smooth as glass. This feels a little rough, so that tells me that there is contaminants within the paint. So for that, I'm gonna be using this towel along with O&R as a clay lubricant. So I'm gonna dip this inside my bucket, follow up with the spray, and glide it along the surface to remove that contamination, leaving a smooth finish and allow the sealant and or wax to sit better on the surface. So let's get started. Clay towel is going to go into the bucket. Then I'm going to follow up with O&R and a spray bottle. Pull out my clay towel that has already been broken in on glass, by the way. Wipe it across the surface of the paint, and I can already hear that contamination. I can hear the friction between the towel and the paint, but it is leaving it a lot smoother. So I'll dip it back in here again, do a couple more sprays. Make sure you want to keep the surface wet so it doesn't drag or mar the surface. And just keep gliding along, and it's going to feel smoother and smoother with every pass. Okay guys, so now that I've made enough passes on the paint to where it feels as smooth as glass, that's when I'm going to put my clay towel back in the bucket, and I'm going to use a towel to dry up the remaining clay lube. After this, I'll move over to the next panel and continue this on the rest of the car. Once it's decontaminated, I'll move on to the funnest part of the detail, which is the polishing step. Okay guys, so now it's time for the fun part of the video, which is going to be the paint correction process. So I'm going to show you which tools I'm going to use today to get that perfect finish. My first tool of choice is going to be the Rinseless 21 Mark II. So this tool is going to have a 21mm throw, which is going to help me correct the larger areas on the car, such as the roof, the hood, rear quarter panels, and a lot of the big flat areas that I don't have to get too intricate with. Now, for some of the tighter areas that are intricate, I'm going to be using what I like to call my toothbrush polisher, which is also known as the Rinseless Hybrid. So this has a couple different functions. I can use it as a rotary, or I can use it as a short or long throw polisher. Now, this and the 21 should be plenty to do the job, but there is one tool that I can't put down, and it's the tool that started it all. It is the Porter Cable 7424, and this thing, like I said, it's the first polisher I ever had. I absolutely love it, and it's never let me down. So I've put a 3-inch backing plate on there, and I'll use a 3-inch pad with it, and it helps me get the areas that aren't too big but aren't too small. So with these three tools combined, I should have everything I need to do a full paint correction on the GT350. Now the next step is taking our compounds, polish, pads, and doing a test spot to see which route I want to go. So that'll be the next step. Okay guys, so here we are. We're gonna do our test spot using the Porter Cable with a Lake Country 3-inch orange light cutting pad. We're here on the rear quarter panel of the GT350, and we are gonna use some hyper polish. Now, the rule is that you always wanna start with the least aggressive method and then work your way up. So back here, I have some definite swirls that I can see with the scan grip. So I'm gonna put it on a speed setting of 3 and simply just spread the polish to start. Now I'm going to turn it up to 5, and that's going to be my working speed using the cross-hatching method to see if the paint corrects. Okay, so go ahead and set the polisher down, pull our skin grip out here so we can actually see our area. Using our eagle, we're going to go ahead and remove the excess polish. So what I can see is that it does look pretty good. Looks like we got most of the lighter swirls out. There is still some deeper swirls that are going to need to be removed. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab a different compound, do a different test spot over here, and see if that makes any improvement with one pass. Okay guys, so the Hyper Polish with the orange cutting pad did an okay job at correcting some of the paint, mainly the lighter swirls, but there was still some deeper swirls, so I am going to need a more aggressive cut. So what I've done is I've pulled out a white cutting pad, a microfiber cutting pad, and I've pulled out this compound called the Last Cut. So this is one of my, I guess, favorite compounds and kind of my go-to as of recently. And so I'm going to use this and do a test and then follow up with the polish to see what that two-step finish is going to look like. So we'll go ahead and apply a little bit of our compound here to this pad. We're going to just rub it in, work it with our thumb, wipe off any excess here on our towel. So I'm going to use this little area right here, which is pretty swirled. Spread our polish here, speed setting of 3. We're going to crank it up to speed setting 5. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at that and see how that did. Grab our scan grip. And yeah, that's exactly what I thought. So that compound and that pad did absolute wonders. So what I want to do is actually want to take that orange pad with hyper polish again and go back over it just to see if it gives a little bit more clarity with the paint, maybe gives it a little bit more depth. But as of right now, that is looking about 99% corrected from the angle that I'm at. So I'm going to go ahead and swap pads, do another pass, and I'm thinking this might be the steps or the processes that I'm going to go with. Okay, final wipe down. This could be the process that we're going with. And I don't want to toot my own horn, guys, but I would say that that is pretty perfect. About 99 point, I wouldn't say 9% perfect, but that is pretty good. So this looks like the process that we're gonna go with. So we're gonna be using the last cut with a microfiber cutting pad, and then we're gonna do our two-step with the light cutting pad, the foam orange with the Optimum Hyper Polish. And this should hopefully give us the same finish all around. Now keep in mind though, not every panel is created equally. So as good as this looks right here, it may not be the same for all the other panels. So it's always good to do what's necessary to each panel appropriately to get the perfect finish. Okay, so we know the process we're going to be using. So I'm using the last cut with the white microfiber cutting pad. So we're going to go ahead and apply our product here. We use 4 pea-sized droplets with this stuff. Get our wire over our shoulder. And I'm a big fan of correcting a panel at a time. So instead of doing a one-step throughout the entire car, then going back over the two-step, I'm gonna do the full correction here on the roof first, and then move down to the hood, and then move out to the rest of the car. Spread our polish here. And go to our working speed of 4 and get going. All right, so using our Orange Eagle Edgeless, wipe off some of that compound and inspect our work. And yeah, looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. So I'll come back, hit it with a hyper polish, and this panel right here will be corrected, and I'll move on to the next area. Okay, so now with our major cutting done, now it's time to finish it and get it to a perfect gloss. So we're gonna move our cutting microfiber pad and put on our orange light cutting pad. If I can get this thing lined up. I'm the worst at this, guys. There we go, that's a perfect fit. So we're gonna be using our hyper polish for our two steps. So I'll give this spray over here. And now we're gonna work this in and get this finish looking good. And that is a good looking finish. So we'll finish the rest of the roof here and then start knocking out the rest of the car, guys. This is looking awesome, and we'll show you before and after right now. guys, so the roof is polished and it is looking awesome. It's been fully corrected, and now it's time to move down to the lower portions of the car. But before I do that, I want to work methodically, and I want to hit this pillar right here. So for this, I'm going to be using the iBrid. So I threw on a Rupes green pad on this one right here, and I'm going to be using the last cut compound. And so what I want to do is I want to focus on just taking my time on this pillar and getting out most of the swirls, because surprisingly there's a lot of swirls in these small intricate areas, and it's always good to check in those areas, especially when you're doing your last walkthrough. So I have swirls right here, and I have some swirls going along the upper edge of this window. There is a little crevice here that I'll have to work down inside, and that's where this pad is going to do a lot of work. So let's get started. Okay, let's inspect our work really quick. I love this thing, by the way. This thing's my favorite. So looking over everything, looks like I'll make one more pass and I'll be good. And then I'll move on to the next area and knock out the other side. Okay guys, so now it's time to move on to the front of the car. So this is probably my favorite part of the detail. Let's just say the owner comes out, what's the first thing he's going to be looking at? He's going to be looking at the front of the car. So I want to make sure that this is as perfect as I can get it. Unfortunately, the front of the car is typically the area that's going to accumulate the most wear and tear. So upon further inspection of my little skin grip light here, I saw that a lot of these swirls and scratches are deeper than I've seen on the rest of the car. I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time with my compound and with my microfiber cutting pad on here to make sure that those are almost completely removed, if not removed, before moving on to my polishing step. So first things first, let's go ahead and get our pad clean before we take it to the car. Alright guys, so I have my orange light cutting pad. I got a little bit of hyper polish on there, so I'm actually going to do a 50-50 here. On this side, I've already gone through with my microfiber cutting pad and my last cut compound, so then I am going to show you guys what it looked like beforehand. I'm just going to finish this last little area and work this so you guys can see the results. Let's wipe this down. They're eagle edgeless. Man, that looks awesome. Keep in mind guys, the hardest part about this is the car already looks good. And anybody will tell you that making a good car look even better is harder than making a bad car look better. So this, so like I said, it's not an easy job, especially when it's a car that's this nice. So we want to make sure that finish is perfect. All right. So this is all done. This has been compounded and polished. I already did the scoop up here. So here's the side that's been done. And here's the side that hasn't been done. Lots of light and deep swirls. Some smaller scratches. Definitely have some scratches around these hood pin areas right here. You can tell when people are pressing their fingers or hands. They're kind of grinding dust into the paint here and causing scratches, so you always want to be careful around there. But coming back over here and then seeing that clarity. So if you made it this far in the video, you're probably wondering why I haven't taped anything off. You've probably seen other detailing videos where they tape off the trim and they put tape everywhere. Well, fortunately for me, I'm using a compound and polish that doesn't require that. Neither one of these cause any fling, nor do they dust. The best part about them as well is that they don't stain rubber trim, for example. So I don't have to be too careful with them, but I don't want to use too much product and waste it. So with that said, I still have to be very careful around the intricate areas to make sure I'm not getting any buildup in these cracks and crevices. So what I'm going to do for here, I have a kind of an intricate area between this window and these louver vents, and then of course I have the painted panels within these louver vents. So for these themselves, I'm going to be using my little Rufus toothbrush polisher to get inside here with a short throw orbit, so that'll be able to correct the paint within those. But for around this outer edge and along this bottom corner here, I'm going to be using my Porter cable with a 3-inch backing plate. So in order to prevent any type of fling from possibly happening or a buildup of compound, what I like to do for areas like this is I apply my compound to my pad. Using a rubber glove, I actually spread it within the fibers of my microfiber cutting pad. So what this does is it primes the pad, it keeps fling from happening, because the second you turn on your polisher, what happens? Everything goes everywhere if you're just putting dime size drops on there. So I'm going ahead and just massaging it into the pad, wipe it off on my towel, cord over my shoulder, little slack here, and then I find out where I want to start. About right here, I'm going to work from here, down, up, then back to the side. Go ahead and wipe it and see what it looks like. It's looking awesome for a one step. Looking really, really good. I'm still gonna follow up with a foam pad and hyper polish, but like I said, with this combination, finding out that this worked for this paint was awesome. I haven't had to change up my process at all, but like I said, I'm always willing to in case that is a necessary thing. We're gonna go ahead and switch pads, knock the rest of this out. I think it's gonna be looking pretty good. Okay guys, so like I mentioned before, for these little louver vents, I'm going to be using my iBrid, aka the toothbrush polisher. So I'm going to be using a little bit of my last cut compound here, and just like with a 3-inch backing plate and pad on the Porter cable, I'm going to massage this compound into the pad to keep anything from possibly flinging. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on a relatively low speed setting, so about a speed setting of 3, and then keep it inside here with the small, or I guess the short orbit function on the iBrid, and then start polishing all these vents. So these are the kind of details that customers don't typically look for, but when you show them, they really appreciate it. And especially on a car like this, I'm polishing every painted area. So everywhere from up top here to down here. All of the harder areas that I can't get to with an iBrid, of course, I'm going to be doing it the old-fashioned way by hand and probably some type of foam pad. But for now, we've got the iBrid and we're going to start working on these louvers. Okay, so now it's time to start working on the iconic fastback of the GT350. Now, one thing I should have mentioned before is that when you're inspecting the car, you want to make note on whether or not the stripes on a car, if the car does have stripes, are either painted on or if they're made out of vinyl. Now, if they're made out of vinyl, you can only polish them so much before you burn through them. Now, I know that these are painted on, I know that they have clear over them, so I'm good to go. Now, with that said, the GT350 logo on the lower portion of the car with the stripes, that is actually vinyl, so I will not be polishing that, but I'll be polishing around that. So we have a big trunk here that we have to knock out, so let's grab the polisher and get to it. Okay, so when I'm doing a paint correction, I personally like to work from top down. So I always knock out the roof, the hood, the trunk first before I start working on the sides. This way I'm not leaning up against an area that I've already corrected and causing any types of small scratches or any swirls like that. So one thing I do take note of is what tools I'm going to be using for this process. So as you can see, the body lines of the car kind of make it harder for the larger polisher such as the Rupes 21 to be able to get along this little edge right here. So it's going to go along this flat panel, it's going to go down this flat panel, but for these little recessed edges and this little wheel arch, I'm going to be using the hybrid, and I'm going to be using the little Porter cable with a 3-inch backing plate. Now, what I mentioned before is that this GT350 vinyl down here, I will not be polishing. I'll probably go lightly over the bottom here and around the top, but I'll keep myself from getting too close to that because I do not want to polish through the vinyl or cause any discoloration since this is in such good shape. Another thing I want to mention is that when I'm polishing, you guys have noticed I'm using this fancy headlamp here. I also have my Scan Grip hand light. When I'm doing a paint correction, this guy right here is my best friend. I can turn it on and have it to where it's on the wave function, turn it back off. And so this allows me to chase the light with my polisher. I'm able to see through the polisher and see the light so I can see the areas that I've corrected and the areas that I haven't. And then when I'm going back over it for a final inspection, that's when I pull one of these out. But I just wanted to give you guys a quick tip on those things, and I'm gonna start working on these flat panels right now. Okay guys, so I finished with this side of the car. For the most part, I ended up using my Rupes 21 Mark II for the bigger flat panels, and then for the more intricate areas and along these ridges, I used the Porter Cable 7424, and then around the door handles and the small little cracks and crevices, I used the hybrid. So I was really happy with the results. I ended up using the microfiber cutting pad and the last cut compound, followed up with the orange cutting pad and hyper polish, and it gave me a perfect finish all around. So now that I'm done with this, I'm gonna work my way to the other side of the car, which is gonna be probably close to the same process before I knock out the front and the rear. Okay, so we're at the back end of the car once again. Like with everything else I do, I like to work from the top down. So I did the trunk earlier and I saved this lower area for last. So for this, I'm gonna be using my yellow cutting pad along with the last cut compound. From what I could tell, it's providing me a perfect finish, so I probably won't need to two-step these areas because the swirls are not that bad. So I'm gonna be using the Porter cable for inside here, using the hybrid around these emblems, then using the Porter cable again down here. So, you know, most people wouldn't polish in between these little panels or around these emblems, but it really does make a big difference for the customer. And so one thing I do like about the foam pad is that it's able to contour a little better. If you've seen any of the other footage, I did implement a foam pad around the more concave areas on the doors as well as the fenders because the foam pad seems to do a better job hugging that versus the microfiber cutting pad. So I'm gonna get started on this. I will catch you guys at the front. Okay guys, so we're almost done, getting pretty close here. We finished the back end and I went ahead and did the side skirts as well with the Porter cable. So now we're working our way to the front end. So this is where I'm gonna pull out my nice little toothbrush polisher, again, the hybrid, and I'm gonna work my way around these headlight recesses and any other painted areas that I can get to. Now underneath this grill here, there's a painted area that I cannot get to with a polisher. So that's something that I would do by hand that you'll be able to see in the footage. Now, coming down here on the lower portion, we're gonna implement the Porter cable again and get those all polished and corrected. Is the customer probably going to be laying on the ground looking to make sure the paint's corrected? No, but if they do, you wanna make sure it's done. It's gonna look good, especially on a high-end detail such as this. So no little detail goes unnoticed. Literally, we get everything. So following that, I'm gonna do some metal polishing by hand, kind of get everything nice and shiny using some optimum metal polish and go from there. So let's get started. Alright guys, so the paint correction is complete. All the paint has been polished and it's looking the best that it has in years. So one thing I like to do following up with my polishing is one last wash. Now this is to ensure there's no leftover compound or polish on the paint because as any detailer knows, you do not want a customer to see that. That looks pretty bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a pre-spray with O&R. I have some Eagles soaking in O&R as well that I'm going to wring out and do one last wipe down. And while the paint is moist, I'm going to follow up with Optimum Car Wax to add some protection. So I'm going to dry that into the surface and move from panel to panel. And at the end of all this, we're going to pull the car out into some sunlight so you guys can see the final finish. So with that said, let's start our pre-spray and get wiping. Alright guys, so the car is wax. So while we're letting that settle, we're gonna move on to the glass. Now, one thing I wanted to point out about the glass is that this is actually the original glass from this car from 1965. So there is some swirls, there's some scratches. The owner requested that I do not polish it, but that doesn't mean I can't clean it. So I'm gonna be using O&R standard dilution with the For the Window glass towel. Simply just gonna spray the towel, wipe it down. Now, the inside of the windows are actually really clean. The restoration job was done extremely well, and I doubt that there's been really a whole lot in this car since it's been done. So I know the inside's clean, so I'm just gonna be getting the outside and working my way around the car. Okay, so we are at the last step of the detail. So we cleaned the windows, so now my favorite thing to do once everything is said and done is go over everything with a quick detailer. Now this kind of gives it just that little bit of that extra pop. So I'm gonna use the Optimum Instant Detailer and Gloss Enhancer. So the polymers kind of do a little cool trick where they make the gloss pop just a little bit more, especially when you top it on top of the car wax. So what I'm gonna do is just lightly spray it using my Smitten drying mitten with the pluffle material on one side. Just rub it into the surface, flip over the mitt, and dry it off. So I'm gonna do this around the entire car and it will make a pretty big difference. Kind of hard to see in the garage, but once we pull it outside, you guys will see the results. Alright guys, this marks the end of the 500K detailing project. I had an awesome time working on this Shelby GT350 and it truly was a blast from the past working on something that was over twice my age. I feel like I got to know the body lines of the car and really see what manufacturers put into these when they were building them back in 1965. With that said, it was a lot of work as well. This whole project took 3 days to finish with the paint correction and filming and everything else, and I've had to take this outfit home each night and wash it to keep things consistent. Anyways, it was a lot of work. Every single nook and cranny of this car has been polished to perfection and the owner is absolutely ecstatic at the results. So I hope you learned something from this video or kind of found out what it takes to do a high-end detailing project. So if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel below, and as always, stay tuned for more right here at The Rag Company.